Hello, everybody. Recently, we did a lesson on civil rights, and we are going to progress now by looking at activism in American history. So I do have a little presentation to get started here, and so I'm not going to waste a lot of time. I'm going to go ahead and get started with that presentation, and we will meet back.
Hey everyone! Today, we're diving into social movements in the United States. This is part of our M1L3 Activism and Leadership series. We'll explore how different social movements have shaped our society, politics, and culture. Ready? Let's get started. Alright, let's talk about what we're going to learn today. First, we'll look at current issues and how we can make decisions and take action on them. Next, we'll evaluate how the national identity of the U.S. has evolved. And finally, we'll interpret events from past and current political activists. Sound good? Social movements have been a big deal in the U.S. since the beginning. In the 2000s, social issues really took the spotlight, especially after we elected our first African American president. But even with that milestone, events like the Trayvon Martin case showed us that racial justice was still a huge issue. The Supreme Court's decision to legalize same-sex marriage also sparked the national LGBTQ rights movement. And let's not forget the power of social media in all this. It's been a game-changer for organizing and spreading messages. Let's go over some key terms that will help us today. Impetus, this means the driving force behind something. Grassroots, this refers to movements that start from the common people, not the leaders. Disseminate, to spread information widely. Pronounced, something that is very noticeable. Ostracized, when someone is excluded from a group. Social movements have really shaped American society, politics, and culture. Since 2016, issues like public accusations of sexual misconduct, police shootings, immigration, and school shootings have fueled movements calling for change. A big push for these movements has been the response to political elections. And again, social media has been huge in spreading these messages quickly and organizing people. Civil disobedience has been around in the U.S. since the American Revolution. It was a key tactic during the civil rights movement, anti-war movement, anti-nuclear movement, and environmental movement. Henry David Thoreau wrote an essay on civil disobedience, saying that individual conscience is more important than the law. One famous example is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s demonstration in Birmingham, Alabama, which led to his arrest and his famous letter from the Birmingham jail.
A just society has fair laws, but most societies aren't like that. So, what can you do? The opponent of slavery, Henry David Thoreau, gave one answer in his essay On Civil Disobedience. Follow your conscience and break the law on moral grounds rather than be a cog in an unjust system. As he put it, let your life be a counter-friction to stop the machine. Influenced by Thoreau, Mahatma Gandhi championed non-violent civil disobedience, or satyagraha, in his campaign for Indian independence. In 1930, he organized a long march to the sea. By picking up a few crystals of salt from the mud, he defied a British law forbidding Indians from making their own salt, inspiring thousands. On a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger. She, too, was arrested. Her symbolic act of defiance helped focus the civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr., another fan of Thoreau's essay, staged major protests against unjust laws affecting America's black community. Laws that were eventually changed as a result. More recently, climate change protesters and the Occupy movement have taken on the fight for justice through non-violent lawbreaking. It's clear that civil disobedience isn't going to go away. There will always be laws that are thought to be unjust in every society across the globe. A just
The Sons and Daughters of Liberty were formed in the 1760s to oppose British taxation, especially the Stamp Act of 1765. Their goals were to fight against British rule and protect colonial rights. The Sons of Liberty organized protests, boycotts, and the Boston Tea Party. The Daughters of Liberty held spinning bees, boycotted British goods, and spread messages of resistance. These groups helped unite the colonies against British rule and set the stage for the American Revolution. The abolitionist movement started in the late 18th century to end slavery, with key figures like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. The women's suffrage movement began in the mid-19th century to fight for women's right to vote, with leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Environmental activism emerged in the mid-20th century to address pollution and environmental degradation, with figures like Rachel Carson and John Muir. Cesar Chavez was a Mexican-American labor leader who co-founded the National Farm Workers Association in 1962. He aimed to improve working conditions, wages, and rights for farm workers. Chavez organized strikes and boycotts, like the Delano grape strike, and led marches to raise awareness. His efforts led to significant improvements in labor laws and working conditions for farm workers.
Today, we are going to talk about Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez, a migrant farm worker who became an organizer. He fought for farm workers' rights and believed that if everyone worked together, they could be treated more fairly. Let's talk about the history of this American hero. Cesar Chavez was born in 1927 in the United States. His parents had Mexican heritage. Cesar Chavez was a Mexican American. When he was 10, his family moved to California. They worked as migrant farm workers. Even though he was just a boy, Cesar Chavez had to work in the fields with them as well. Migrant workers were workers that had to move from place to place. Life was very hard. Migrant workers were not treated fairly. When he was older, Cesar Chavez wanted to help and bring change. He started to bring people together. He knew that if they worked together, they could fight for their rights and get treated more fairly. He began giving speeches and even led marches and protests. In 1962, Cesar Chavez started a group later called United Farm Workers to fight for better pay and treatment, and it's still around today. In 1965, they led a successful strike against grape growers in Delano, California. A strike is when workers refuse to work until something changes. On a side note, it took 5 years and they never gave up because Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers wanted to fight for better treatment and they were not willing to give up. He was a hero. He fought for fair treatment and pay. He believed it was never fair to be mistreated because of your heritage. Cesar Chavez, a migrant farm worker who became an organizer. He fought for farm workers' rights and believed that if everyone worked together, they could be treated more fairly. Thanks so much for watching this video.
Racial injustice has been a persistent issue in the U.S., highlighted by the death of Trayvon Martin in 2012. The Black Lives Matter movement was created on social media by activists Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi. BLM gained attention after the shooting deaths of unarmed black men by police, like Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Protests and increased visibility of racial discrimination have led to the use of body cameras and more prosecutions of police officers.
What started as a hashtag in 2013 went from trending on social media to becoming one of the largest movements in American history. Black Lives Matter started with a Facebook post by one of its founders, Alicia Garza. Her post, entitled "A Love Letter to Black People," was a dedication to the Black community after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the killing of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. She ended with the words, "Black people, I love you, I love us, our lives matter." Garza and her friends Patrisse Cullors and Opal Tometi coined the hashtag Black Lives Matter later that year. As the hashtag's popularity grew, so did backlash with the rise of white lives and all lives matter groups. The number of Black victims of police brutality also grew, making the slogan increasingly important. In 2014, the deaths of Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, and Michael Brown ignited the movement and protests nationwide. But it was the death of Michelle Clouseau that same year that began Say Her Name, a subsection of the Black Lives Matter movement that focuses on Black women who have lost their lives to police violence. It quickly rose in popularity and was used in protests for the deaths of Sandra Bland and then Breonna Taylor. In 2019, places where BLM protests occurred had a 20% decrease in killings by police. Local protests also increased the amount of police body cams and community policing initiatives. In 2020, as many as 26 million people participated in demonstrations protesting the killing of George Floyd. By the end of the year, Black Lives Matter raised $90 million, which went to expenses like crisis intervention, civic engagement, and grassroots funding. The killing of George Floyd also changed the demographics of support towards Black Lives Matter. Nearly 95% of the protests happened in majority white counties. Today, there are 3 entities of Black Lives Matter, including the nonprofit BLM Global Network Foundation, which committed $21.7 million in grant funding to official and unofficial BLM chapters, as well as 30 Black-led local organizations. But despite the organization's success, family members of Tamir Rice and Michael Brown have spoken out against Black Lives Matter for profiting off the police killings of their relatives. And some have questioned where financial contributions go. Still, the mission of Black Lives Matter remains straightforward, and as it's grown, so has its impact. Black Lives Matter members in Los Angeles successfully fought for the firing of ex-LAPD police chief Charlie Beck after they saw a rise in police shootings of Black suspects in the area. In 2020, Black Lives Matter received more media coverage than any protest in 50 years, and the hashtag was shared more than 100 million times in the month after George Floyd was killed. Within weeks of the 2020 protests, Louisville, Kentucky banned no-knock warrants, Minneapolis banned chokeholds, and major cities made budget cuts to their police departments, including Los Angeles and New York City.
Hey, thanks for watching.
What started as a
In 2016, Colin Kaepernick, a San Francisco 49ers quarterback, kneeled during the national anthem to protest discrimination and police brutality against people of color. His protest aimed to highlight strained police-minority relations and high incarceration rates of African Americans. Other players and fans joined in solidarity, but some viewed it as disrespectful, with President Trump calling for the players to be fired. Despite the controversy, the protests had significant impacts. They raised awareness of racial discrimination issues, leading to changes such as the increased use of police body cameras to ensure accountability. There was also a rise in prosecutions of police officers for misconduct. However, there was considerable pushback. In Charlottesville, Virginia, a large rally by white nationalist groups revealed deep societal divisions. Organizations like Blue Lives Matter argued that police officers were unfairly targeted, while groups like White Lives Matter claimed white Americans face significant challenges. This complex picture shows progress and increased awareness of racial issues, alongside significant resistance and debate about justice and equality in America. Social movements bring out the best and worst in society, forcing us to confront difficult questions about our identity and values. Youth activism has grown since the 2000s, focusing on issues like immigration, racial justice, and gun control. Social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram amplify youth voices and organizing efforts. The March for Our Lives in 2018, led by students after the Parkland shooting, was a significant event advocating for gun control. Despite backlash from groups like the NRA, youth activism has had a notable impact on public discourse and policy. The Christian Coalition, established in 1989 by Pat Robertson, aimed to influence public policy with conservative Christian values. It became a powerful force in American politics, especially within the Republican Party. The pro-life movement opposes abortion and seeks to overturn Roe v. Wade. It has influenced significant legislation and court decisions, including the recent overturning of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court. Blue Lives Matter supports law enforcement officers and opposes anti-police sentiment, emerging as a response to Black Lives Matter. Second Amendment advocacy includes movements and organizations like the NRA that advocate for gun rights and oppose gun control measures. These movements have successfully lobbied against many gun control laws and have a strong influence on American politics and policy.
Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to share a different presentation screen. So bear with me for a moment. Because if we are live in class, what we're going to do is we're going to take a few
Blue
moments.
Lives Matter supports law enforcement officers.
Don't want it to play automatically.
Blue Lives Matter.
Okay, well, the discussion question is, what do you think are good causes to be an activist in the world today for? So I want you to think about the world today. Think about things that you would want to be an activist for. Maybe it's something that was already just covered in class. Maybe it's gender issues. Maybe it's gun control. Maybe it's something that wasn't mentioned. You know, digital safety and privacy and security, mental health awareness, even food security. We can go back to the progressive era and look at, how safe is our food. So I want you to think about that for a second and think about what you would be willing to be an activist for. Okay, so we're going to just kind of talk about that in class if we're watching this live. If we're not watching it live, in a few moments, we're going to move on to our discussion about discussing the impact of social media on modern social movements. Think about how Twitter, Snapchat, think about anytime anything happens in the world, how instantaneously we find out about it. And so is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I want you guys to kind of have a little discussion about that. Again, if we're doing this in class, we're going to have a live discussion with it. If you're not watching it live in class, then we are going to be doing a discussion on your own.
Did you know?
Okay.
The March for Our Lives rally in 2018 was organized by students from Parkland, Florida, following a school shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School.
Okay, the little voiceover, it plays automatically, so we're going to have a few more slides on that.
Take some time to click on the interactive timeline to review social movements throughout American history.
Okay, so when you do click on this timeline, it's going to take you over here. So I wanted to share the timeline with you and kind of show you some of the things. This is a really cool timeline. It starts off in colonial times, and if you hover over the titles, it'll give you a little explanation of each one of these things. So if you see one that kind of interests you, you can look at it and read a little bit about it. It's not too much to read, it's just a little bit. So you can kind of go on each one and learn about all these different time periods of social activism. I like this because there's pictures involved. You can click on the pictures if you want. You can zoom in on them. You can read about each one. It'll take you to other resources if you click on it. And then if you go all the way down here to the bottom, it'll go through each one individually. And again, you can kind of look at the resources. So I wanted to share that with you. And again, you're going to have access to that on your own. Okay, one more thing to do here. And that is, if you are live in class, we are going to play a Kahoot. And if you are not live in class, you are just going to take a look at the Kahoot notes. So another benefit to coming to class is you get to play the Kahoots. All right, so let me go ahead and focus down here on the Kahoot. And I am going to, again, shrink this down. And we're going to take a look at the flashcards. So, which event marked the birth of the Black Lives Matter movement? And that would be the death of Trayvon Martin. Okay, there we go. Which of the following best describes the concept of civil disobedience? Okay. The refusal to obey certain laws as a form of peaceful protest. We're going to go ahead and say you know that. All right, who co-founded the National Farm Workers Association? Cesar Chavez. Oops, we didn't even flip that over, but it was Cesar Chavez. All right, what was the primary goal of the Sons of Liberty? They opposed British rule and taxation without representation. Remember, they said if you were not represented in Parliament, that it was unfair to tax us. All right, which movement was sparked by the Parkland shooting in 2018? That would be March for Our Lives. All right, what was the primary focus of the pro-life movement? Opposing abortion and seeking to overturn Roe v. Wade. Okay, and I'm saying that we know all these. If you don't know one, say that you don't know it so it can come back and it can quiz you again until you do know all of these, because these will be your test questions. All right, which event is known for its role in the civil rights movement, challenging racial segregation on public buses? That would be the Montgomery bus boycott. What was the main impact of the Black Power movement? It increased visibility of issues of racial discrimination. What was the main goal of the women's suffrage movement? That was granting women the right to vote. Which movement emerged as a response to the Black Lives movement? That would be the Blue Lives Matter movement. What was the primary method of protest used by the Sons of Liberty? Well, they organized protests and boycotts. Sometimes they even tarred and feathered people. Okay, originating from the common people or local level. This is one of your vocab words, and that would be grassroots movements. Driving forces or motivation behind something. Again, a vocab word would be impetus. And it said that we knew all of those. Okay, so if there is anything that you did not know, you are going to go in and you are going to retest yourself and go back and review any material that you don't understand and get a hold of me if there's anything that you would like me to clarify for you.